with some theme music. I know, yeah. Welcome, everyone, to Mythstorie, a podcast about myths and history. I am one of your hosts, Bryant, with not my permanent guest, but my co-host. I'm going to upgrade Peter because he's here right now. Yeah, I know. Sorry, Cammy. Peter, welcome back. This isn't a Podicus Magnus necessarily, but it is a special event. We are here live doing a holiday episode for Pod VCOM. We first joined in last August when they did their first event, and it was a lot of fun. But we pre-recorded. It was great, but it was also not enough. So we're here live, and we are ready to regale with some stories. Peter, how are you?
I'm very well.
You look great. You look like an 1800s English bah humbugger.
Buggery.
Right, yeah. You're the guy that bought all the ducks from the store, and no one's going to have any roast duck.
Nope, I'm keeping all the ducks. Had a nice filling English breakfast this morning to get myself in the mood.
I saw. Yep. Nope. Yeah. My mom would be proud. I'm really sure she would be. So everyone, Mythstorie, if you've never seen us, you're just joining us. What we like to do, it's typically myself and my permanent guest, Cammy, as I call her. And every Wednesday, we like to pick any sort of myth or legend. So Hercules, Troy, Odin, Chupacabra. All those things have something in common, and there's stories that are topics that we've talked about on the show. We give you a little slice of the story. We like to come up with like original little stories, and then we kind of talk about, I like to say the facts, but I like to talk about the happenings of the legends and the myths, what makes them tick and things like that. And today, now this is fortuitous, Peter, extremely fortuitous.
It is.
It's a great word for one, but Cammy, I think it was Cammy that picked this time slot a while ago. And we didn't realize that it would coincide so well with what we're going to be talking about today.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to like give everything away, but obviously we're dressed in a certain way. I've got my handmade Goodwill sweater with jingle bells on that I bought years ago. And we are going to discuss two figures. One of them is Santa. Let's just rip that Band-Aid off.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some cool stuff there. And then another one is you may have heard of him, Krampus, the evil dude. He's gained a lot of popularity recently.
Mm-hmm.
It's been nothing but ups for him since the 1800s. But we're going to talk about him, and it's extremely lucky that we're talking about him today, because yesterday was like Krampus Day. Funny enough, like the legitimate Austrians in the 1800s were celebrating Krampus Nacht. I always say Krampus or Krampus. So we're really fortunate because we have Krampus. We're here on this day. Yesterday night, I think, is when you would have done a Krampus run, is what it's called. Cammy was with me when I bought the sweater, and many more that I hawked. But Krampus is especially special. You may think of him. Santa has a lot of companions. Krampus is a unique companion because depending on sort of where the origins go, he does sort of different things. But typically, he does one major thing, and that's yesterday morning. Your kids would have woken up, Peter, and Krampus would have visited and left. If they were bad, would have left a gift for them, and that gift would have been a Switch. Now, not the Nintendo kind, but the birch twig kind, so you can pelt their butts red because they've been bad. And if they've been really bad, then apparently he's just going to take them. It's just it. For a whole year, he takes them, and
where does he take them?
Rehabilitation in hell, I guess. But we're gonna get started now with there's not a lot of writings. There's really no writings on Krampus. There's a lot of modern stuff today. There's like a horror film that came out a couple years ago and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So there's tons of content making it today. But the 1800s and before that, they didn't write stories about him. So I'm just gonna give you a nice little thing about Krampus And then we're going to talk a little bit more on the origins of Krampus. And then Peter's going to dive into his content on the big fat guy. Mm-hmm. So, not me, Santa. Let's get started, though. So Krampus Nacht, or Krampus Night, is December 5th of every year and coincides with Nicolastag, or Saint Nicholas Day. While the old Saint Nicholas leaves candy for children who have behaved the last year, Krampus leaves something for their parents. Some say Krampus takes any child who misbehaved to his home in the underworld, where they remain until next year. Others believe that the figure leaves a wooden switch so that the child's parents can commit to corporal punishment. Today, though, many countries celebrate Krampuslauf, or Run, where during a night of drink, people dress as Krampus with sticks and chains and chase people harmlessly, as harmless as you can, in remembrance of Krampus. Krampus, despite his terror, has always appealed to the people of the Alps, where he originates from. The Church, the Catholic Church and Austrian Empire went so far as to suppress even mentioning the figure through the ages because of his influence and popularity. A way to celebrate Christmas is a great... Today, however, he is celebrated as an anti-hero of sorts, as a way to celebrate Christmas in parallel to the Coca-Cola Santa that has formed in the last 50 or so years. Now, instead, people try running through the streets with their chains. So that's a little bit of Krampus for you. Again, there's not too many writings. He's a long originating story, and it's interesting. We've talked many times about the Germanic, the old pagan and Scandinavian religions. There's this big umbrella. So if you ever hear the term like Norse mythology, it really encompasses the Germanic peoples, Anglo-Saxons, and even going as far as, like, if you can imagine, if you're not really good at your geography, think of the Italian, the boot, the stripper boot of Italy, the very top of that, kind of where the Alps are going to be. That's where this myth sort of was really popular and originated in. Now, over time, the Germanic barbarian pagans that lived in these areas that helped, deplete the glory of Rome at the height of its power. Yes, thank you, Cammie, that she put the sex worker boot. That's the official Italian term. Over time, these Germanic peoples Christianized. They all... from Ireland to the rest of Europe, where the Germanic the pagans, the Vikings, basically settled in. During this Christianization process, they still held on to a lot of their old traditions and values that had clearly had pagan roots. So Easter, a lot of these holidays were completely pagan, and the church was unable to just say stop it, so they converted a lot of they converted the people. They converted the feasts, the people. Like, old gods became old kings, and old events became kind of Christian based. Like, Cammie and I did a great episode on the Loch Ness Monster. And what I loved about it is the story we found was basically about how a priest was able to, like, Christianize the Loch Ness. So in this story, we don't have a direct source, but historians essentially believe that Krampus is some kind of pagan demon. Krampus derives from I think it's directly a German word dealing with the word claw. And they think that Krampus was some sort of a pagan monster and might have been associated with the winter solstice specifically. I mean, there was tons of celebrating during the winter solstice for these Vikings. I mean, you have nothing to do except ski and arm wrestle. And of course you would get your skalds, or your poets, and they would just sit around the campfire and tell you stories about how Loki messed up. So those stories eventually, those celebrations would still happen, but they would just turn into Christian stories. And so they think Krampus was this pagan entity that was transferred into Christianity, just so that way it fell in line with things, and then it somehow got connected to Santa. And we'll talk about that soon. But Santa has a lot of companions depending on where you're celebrating Christmas, and so Krampus is sort of the companion of the Alp region. Goes into it was especially clung to Austria, especially clung to Germany and a few other places. And then there's just been this huge resurgence today. And like I said, it's this sort of like anti-hero that has sort of formed. And again, the commercialization of Christmas has been going on for the last few years. And I think people just sort of see Krampus as a really ideal way of kind of fighting against that. So here, I'm going to pull up. Here we go.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
You're much better at this than I am.
No, yeah. So I've got this image here. If you're listening to us, you can watch. This is going to be archived on YouTube and I think Facebook Live, essentially under our Mythstorie group videos. So this is one of my favorite postcards too, because look how happy they look. This is the union of Krampus and Saint Nicholas, Santa, is really attested to the 1800s. So in Austria in the 1800s, these gift cards, these Christmas cards, this has been, a long time thing, essentially. These were the kind of things you would buy. And you would, and here's a great characterization of Santa he's got his birch twig that he's going to whip you with, and then he's using his long tongue to take this. Yeah, doesn't that kid just look like they're up to no good? And here's another one that's pretty well detailed as well. He's got the hooves. He's very like classic devil. My studies, I'll go over my sources later, but my sources say that the horned devil as we know it really became a thing in the medieval period during the 11th century. That's how he was depicted. And so not just the devil, but other demons and things like that. And this looks like classic devil.
Sorry, Brian, if I may, like in a lot of the like classic like old Saint Nicholas iconography, you see him like chaining and imprisoning demons, and in a lot of cases, these icons have grown into these kind of like seasonal assistants for him.
That's a great point. So, and what's wild though, like I mentioned in my little story, this one's not as clear, I don't think, but this is a family gathering and Krampus is there. So it's a little more harmless, and you can just see on the far right, you can see Saint Nicholas, I believe, with a bishop's like mitre and things like that. So I just want to show this one more time because I love it so much.
It's very warm.
It is. And that's the thing. In the 1800s, it had that same sentiment, actually. It wasn't, I mean, it was that sort of thing. Like today, a parent will go like, you're not doing your homework. You need to do your homework because then Santa won't come. You could say that all year round. That's kind of what he served back then. But of course, they could say like, he will beat your butt to death and drag you to hell. You could say that, in 1800s Austria. But people would buy these cards and it would be this friendly thing. And so I don't know, it seems like such a modern humor kind of thing. I feel like they wouldn't do that back then. And it was a problem because the Austrian Empire eventually had to ban Krampus, the depiction of him, like the sale of these cards. And they even went so far as to require licenses if you wanted to be Saint Nick. So you couldn't just don the outfit and walk the streets. Then you'd have like dudes with pikes go like, show me your identification. I mean, can you like imagine that? Like, oh dude, what happened to Hans? He was hanged. He was walking around without his Santa permit. I mean, what are you going to do? So that is my little spiel about Krampus. We'll go a little bit more into some of the specifics too, but Peter has, I'm just the appetizer. I'm the show opener here. We've got the big figure that we're going to discuss. And I guess I'll let you take it away.
I will. But before I do, I was just kind of interesting as you were talking. It's interesting to see how punishment is kind of introduced into the holiday season. Like these stories of Saint Nicholas, we're going to get into some of those. He just was a really good guy. Like, he rescued everyone, whether they were murderers and killers or innocent people.
Yeah.
So the introduction of these like punishing characters into his kind of feast day and celebration is interesting. And I'm wondering if you have any ideas on why that happened or.
I mean, I think parents always have. Did you see Cammy's comment, by the way?
Thank you, Cam.
I think parents always have a need to scare children, and like Cammy and I, we've talked about a lot. We've all talked about in our episodes. We've talked about old stories, and I think things like the Big Bad Wolf. We've talked about like Spring Heel Jack, the Victorian era killer, and how they would become boogeymen, and you would tell your kids these stories to scare them. One, to tease them, but two, you did not want little Hans to go out in the forest in 1800s Austria. You didn't want him to run off like that because he would die. He would not survive, you know? And I think that through the Christian nature and things like that, it just worked out that it just worked out. And again, so I'm gonna bring a buzzword, mytheme, mytheme. It's a real word. I'm not making it up. And this mytheme, so Santa isn't a mytheme. He's a figure, a saint, and he, as many Christian saints do, he's spread throughout the Christian lands. But the mytheme here is that he had a companion who doled out the punishment. I love it. I'll look at my sources in a minute. But one of my sources, I'll name them in just a sec, they use the term good cop, bad cop routine for Krampus and Santa. Because like someone has to be the bad cop, someone has to be the good cop. And so again, even 300 years ago, Krampus wasn't like scary, or he's scary to the kids, but it was like okay to talk about him and to threaten your kids with him. And people would dress up. The Krampus run has been going on for hundreds of years. And so it was harmless back then. Like things you would think would happen at a frat party today only were happening back then. And it's just so fun. It's just such a cool idea to think about that people were doing that. And Santa is super nice and good and all that, but Krampus brings like a fun twist to it. But I guess like you've always got to have a threat of punishment. If kids are getting rewards, you gotta getting not a reward isn't too bad. Like if I tell Kinley, hey, if you do this assignment now, I'll give you a Kit Kat. She'll go, I mean, if I don't do it, I don't get a Kit Kat, but that's okay. But if I say, if you don't do your homework, I will beat your butt with a stick, then she'll go, I might want to do my homework. I don't beat Kinley for her homework.
That's good to know. But it is interesting. Like in America, we don't have like an equivalent of Krampus, but we've got like the naughty list. There is an implied punishment there. I just think it's interesting how we have, at least in America, so much of this Santa Claus tradition is parents lying to their children.
I know. Yeah,
and at the same time threatening punishment for misbehavior. It's really contradictory.
Right. Yeah. Parenting's evolved a lot of ways, but it's funny. We lie kind of for the commercialization of it all, for the magic and the spirit of it, and that makes sense. So. Speaking
of which, I should have thrown in a disclaimer there. So if you're listening with some youngsters, we are going to be exploring the myth of Santa Claus. So if you want to keep certain things secret, it might be time to maybe do some earmuffs for the kids.
Or if you're in your car and your 13-year-old is in there and still believes,
God bless them.
It's time, guys. I'm sorry. This is the best way though, because it's fun to learn the truth. I mean, there's a huge truth to this. That's what's really cool. So
yeah, there's a thread of like ancient history in here, and I'm going to talk about that now. So I'm going to be uncovering the mystery of the man who breaks into our houses every Christmas Eve. Now, I'm fascinated by the popular American version of Santa Claus, and we're going to circle back around to him near the end. But there are so many regional versions of this character. And I know that, Bryant, your mother's from England. Did you grow up with any like distinctly British Santa traditions?
Yeah, I talked to her yesterday too a little bit about it. His name was Father Christmas for them. I mean, Santa Claus was good, but Santa Claus is more American, although I think it's used pretty well today. But Father Christmas is what you're going to hear in England for sure. And he distinctively would deliver mince pies. That was like the big thing, the yummy little pies, and sherry. Actually, she mentioned that. So mince pies and sherry, that's what everyone gets. And it was interesting. So like as far as how we would celebrate Christmas, we would always, like, the Christmas tree was bare until it wasn't bare. Sorry, it was decorated, but there were no presents under the tree until the night, Christmas Eve, the night of Christmas Eve. I would go to bed with my sister and my brother, and then we'd wake up and there would just be presents there. And Kyle, my girlfriend, when we started living together and things like that, she was used to putting presents there as they kind of come all December long. I like both, but there's just something cool about, presents appearing out of nowhere.
It is really cool.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work if you're a parent, but it's
very,
very magical.
Right.
Growing up, we had our own traditions as well. We used to leave beer for Santa.
Oh, wow.
And once I discovered who Santa really was, that made a lot of sense. So my dad likes a beer now and again.
That's great.
We had a detached garage growing up, and there was an upper floor, and there was a silhouette kind of cast in the window. My mother used to tell me that it was one of Santa's elves, and he was always watching me. So there was always this like, good. The elf is watching. He's Santa's little snitch.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
And growing up, my sister is 10 years younger than I am, so she was like, it was really fun to have like a baby sister. So my brother and I used to put just elaborate effort into fooling my sister, who probably believed in Santa way beyond when she probably should have, because we were so convincing in our fooling of her.
But that's so great.
So anyway, so these myths and legends are constantly evolving, and every teller, every family brings his or own traditions and interpretations to it. So we want to hear about your family's Santa's mythology. So if you have any cool traditions that are kind of exclusive to you or are kind of regional, please share them in our chat. And if we have time, we'll talk about them at the end.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
So Bryant, you mentioned that yesterday was Krampus Day. Do you know what today is?
I don't know. Perhaps the accompanying day of...
It is the feast day of Saint Nicholas.
That's right.
Incredible coincidence. So
insane.
Yeah. So
kind of insane.
Like Cami had a visionary moment and booked us on today. So we get to talk about Saint Nicholas. So my source, I think you probably have more detailed sources than I do, Brian, but I used a wonderful website, the stnicholascenter.org, which is where I got a lot of history and some Saint Nicholas stories.
Awesome site.
I'm going to read some right now. So the man we know as Saint Nicholas was born in the 3rd century AD to Greek Christian parents in the city of Patara in Asia Minor, which is like modern day Turkey. He was not Turkish, however. Young Nicholas was born into a wealthy family, and when his parents both died during an epidemic, their substantial fortune passed to Nicholas. Now, Nicholas was a devout Christian from a very early age and was made the Bishop of Myra while still a young man. And following Jesus' teachings on charity, Nicholas gave much of his fortune to the poor, sick, and disadvantaged. And being a humble man, Nicholas's gifts were always given in secret and anonymously. Now, Bishop Nicholas learned of a local merchant who had once been quite prosperous, but had fallen on hard times following some shady dealings. The merchant had 3 daughters, but was too poor to pay the dowries so they could be married. The daughters were in danger of entering a life of prostitution if they could not be married off, as the father could no longer support them. Hearing this news, Nicholas sprung into action. Under the cover of night, Nicholas made his way to the merchant's house. Finding an open window, Nicholas tossed a bag of gold coins into the house. Now, in some versions of the story, the gold lands in a shoe or stockings, which is why we hang our stockings and in some places place our shoes by the fireplace. And in another version, Nicholas doesn't throw coins, but gold balls. So some people put oranges in their stockings to symbolize the gold balls. I actually grew up with oranges in my stockings.
Oh, wow.
But interestingly, my mother did not know that story. It was a tradition that was handed down to her from her parents, but she didn't know the gold ball story, which I thought was fascinating.
That's cool.
The next day, the whole town was rejoicing. The merchant had used the gold to find a fine match for his eldest daughter. So the next night, Nicholas returned again to the merchant's house and threw another bag of gold through the window. And the next morning, the merchant paid the dowry of his second eldest daughter. On the 3rd night, I love when they're always in threes. On the 3rd night, when Nicholas returned to the merchant's house, he found the merchant hiding outside of his window, hoping to catch a glimpse of his benefactor. The merchant fell to his knees and kissed the bishop's robes, but Nicholas swore the man to secrecy. But obviously, the story got out because St. Nicholas's reputation as a gift giver lives on through the centuries. There are dozens of remarkable stories about St. Nicholas. Once, while on board a ship during a terrifying storm, Nicholas fervently prayed and the storm magically disappeared. In another story, he resurrected the bodies of 3 children who had been murdered and placed in a pickle barrel to be sold as pork by an evil butcher. And according to my wife, this evil butcher is one of his assistants in modern day reenactments, which is crazy.
Yeah.
After his death, a magical elixir that possessed healing properties was said to flow from his tomb. Just tons of crazy Nicholas stories. He rescued all people, whether innocent or criminal, from debt, slavery, disease, imprisonment, and execution. Really solid guy.
Yeah.
For this reason, he's the patron saint of children, sailors, bankers, pawnbrokers, scholars, orphans, laborers, travelers, merchants, judges, paupers, marriageable maidens, students, children. Wow, that's repeating. Victims of injustice, perfumers, even thieves, and murderers. And it's perhaps his association with sailors that his legend became so popular, as mariners carried his stories all over the Mediterranean and Europe. So the feast day of St. Nicholas, which is today, December 6th, is still celebrated throughout Europe, but primarily in the Netherlands, where he is known as Sinterklaas. St. Nicholas is often depicted in his bishop's robes, sporting a long white beard and riding a white horse. The feast day is a major gift-giving holiday, particularly for children. Now, during the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther had some ideas about this, and he sought to move away from the veneration of Catholic saints, of which Nicholas is one of the most popular. He wanted to establish the Christ child or Christkind as the greatest gift giver, and tried to move the practice of gift giving to Christmas Day. But the celebration of St. Nicholas persisted, and his mythic character, and later Santa Claus, became increasingly associated with the Christmas season. It's interesting. My brother-in-law is from the country of Colombia, and where Santa Claus like appears in advertisements and stuff.
Yeah.
But in Colombia and a lot of Latin America, the Christ child brings the gifts on.
Oh, cool. That's great. Good job, Martin.
So you don't have to explain, like, how does Santa fit down the chimney? It's the Christ child, he does whatever he wants.
Right.
There are variations on the St. Nicholas character all over Europe. He is called Der Kerstman, or Christmas man in Dutch, Père Noël in France, Papa Noel in Italy, and he has assistants as well, and they're not elves. Krampus is one of them. Zwart Piet is another character who appeared in mostly in the Netherlands in the 1850s. He's a Spanish Moor that St. Nicholas saved from slavery, and he entertains children and distributes treats during his visits. And in Switzerland, there's Santa Claus is accompanied by Schmutzli, who is a Krampus-type character who carries a switch for beating wicked children.
Yep.
Now, while St. Nicholas is undoubtedly a major precursor to our modern version of Santa Claus, some of his origins, like of our American Santa Claus and Father Christmas as well, are decisively pre-Christian. So, and you alluded to this in your Krampus story. And Bryant, I wasn't around for this, but you and Cammie did an episode on Yule. If you want to go back to episode 14, could you give us a quick refresher on Yule and its relationship with Odin?
Yeah, so I just re-listened to the episode, and man, it's great. So we've been doing the show for a little over a year now, and this was early during our lack of expertise on audio equipment. I just went and rebuffed the episode, though. It sounds much better. Go listen to it if you can. But yeah, the Yule, everyone's very familiar with like Yule logs, especially like the treats, the cakes, and stuff like that in France. But there was this concept, distinct. Odin is quite ancient as the Greek legends, but for the Germanic and pagan people of Scandinavia, all of what we know as Germany, and again the Alpine region, where I've talked about where Krampus is from, but even beyond that, he's known as by many different names. And there was this concept of the wild hunt, where during the darkest nights or the darkest days of the year, where you had barely any sunlight, you needed to stay inside. You needed to keep a big hearth going, a big fire going, to sacrifice your nice horse, to burn the beautiful trees. And when you burned them, it gave you a nice fire and nice company, but it also was given to Odin and the gods. You when you burn stuff, it goes straight to them. It's how you deliver packages to them. And it was it also helped the idea of, let's stay together. No, it's the wild hunt. Don't go outside, stay inside. let's do that. And it just kind of evolved. There's tons of, variations, of course, through it all. But in a nutshell, that's kind of it. It was this all important figure. But Odin did indeed, you make Odin happy, he makes you happy.
Mm-hmm.
You get stuff in return. So there is this connection of an all-encompassing gift giver. If you're good to him, it comes back to you. It reciprocates.
Yeah. And physically, I mean, like Odin is very kind of Santa-like. He's like old man, white beard.
Yeah.
Traditionally, fur-trimmed robes.
Mm-hmm.
He was known to travel down the chimney. Interesting kind of thing I noticed recently. So he had a magical horse, Sleipnir.
Sleipnir, yeah.
How many legs does Sleipnir have?
Two extra?
He has 8 legs.
Oh, okay. All right.
And how many reindeer does Santa have?
Myth busted.
And also, Odin's location in the north might also help explain why, Santa's home is now believed to be the North Pole. That's a fairly recent development, but it certainly could be influenced by that northern Norse influence. So cool stuff.
That's great.
Well. And so we've talked about these like old roots of Santa Claus, but now I want to bring it back around to the guy that we see during this Christmas season at the mall, ringing the bell for the Salvation Army. This kind of iconic character, and I think it's a really great example of America as this great melting pot, because our American Santa is like, there are pieces of him from all these different cultures. There's certainly Saint Nicholas. There's certainly Father Christmas, who is a fairly different character. There's this Odin. There is American advertising, music, movies. I think, when we're talking about Santa Claus in America, I think it's safe to say that Santa Claus might be the most popular myth in the United States of America. And,
that's a great idea.
And what's cool, is it's a living, changing myth that we get to see evolve during our lifetimes. Like, we talk a lot about, these ancient stories, and the stories that survive. I mean, a lot of these were from an oral tradition, and we might know one version, but there may have been hundreds of versions of these stories, and vying for popularity and changing. But we only have like one copy of Beowulf, but obviously it was probably performed thousands of times, and it was different every single time. And by kind of participating in the modern Santa Claus myth, we're seeing it evolve constantly. We're seeing the cursed elf on a shelf, it is vying for influence in this old Santa Claus myth. I think it's fascinating. So I'm going to talk a little bit about when Santa starts to show up in the United States.
Coca-Cola Santa, that's what I call him.
That's a big one for sure.
Yeah.
Let me find my notes here. So the name Santa Claus first appeared in print in 1773. It's an Americanized version of Sinterklaas, which is the Dutch version, or the Dutch Saint Nicholas is Sinterklaas.
Yeah, I think that even in itself is sort of like a kind of derives from an other word for it, but it's became the name of him. Yeah.
Yeah. And his original appearance in America was really kind of a parody of Dutch culture. He's not wearing his bishop robes anymore. He's dressed kind of as a sailor. He's got a round belly and a green coat and a sailor's cap. But slowly, he starts to show up more in popular culture, and his appearance and legend becomes a little more refined. So I wish I had my photos up for this, but they were made were made canon after the publication of the poem A Visit from Saint Nicholas in 1823 by Clement Clark Moore. Now, this poem is better known as 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, which is a super popular, recognizable poem about Santa Claus. And it really kind of standardized, Santa's appearance, the flying sleigh, the 8 named reindeer, traveling up the chimney. That was all kind of established in that poem. And you can see how that's taken hold in our modern understanding of Santa. His physical appearance was further solidified by the cartoonist Thomas Nast, whose images of Santa appeared in Harper's Weekly. And as you alluded to, Bryant, his iconic red suit with the white fur trim, black boots, and wide black belt was made popular by Coca-Cola in the 1930s.
This is a NAS image right here, I think, right, that I just pulled up. Is that right?
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, this is kind of like the beta build of Coca-Cola Santa. They used this, and then they hired some other guys who built off of this to what we know today.
Correct. Do we have anybody sharing Santa's a myth?
Well, you know,
like back it to you, buddy.
I know, yeah. Someone jumped in. I want to just bunch into, because it's not an episode of Mythstorie if I don't mention Byzantine once. And of course, the Byzantium is after Rome fell a few hundred years into the AD. It before it completely fell, it divided into East and West. And East was sort of where the Mediterranean, Greece, into Asia Minor was, and then the West is, of course, like West Europe, Italy, and such. And that's Santa is Greek. He was Greek. He probably spoke Greek, maybe Latin as well, especially if he was from a rich family. But he was a Greek saint, and that's incredibly important. I mentioned, like, when I was a kid, people would be like, "Did you know Santa's from Turkey?" And I was like, I don't know what Turkey is. Why would a bird find a country? But now I love the Byzantine culture, Byzantium. It's really cool to see how important that is. And especially because, like, you talk about how Martin Luther wanted to stop venerating saints so darn much. That was a huge thing in the Greek Orthodox Church and in the Catholic Church too. But icons, the iconoclast movement was a huge deal. People died because they had a picture or a important Christian kind of like artifact for their home. It was a huge deal. And he was a big part of that. And some of the classic sources, so Peter used stnicholascenter.org, which is an amazing website, but we have they list the classic sources of Saint Nicholas. There's writings from AD 400, the Iconium on Nicholas of Myra by Saint Proclus, Archbishop of Constantinople, which is a pretty big city. That was the capital of the Eastern Empire. That's from AD 440. Again, Saint Nicholas was around AD 270 to 343. So, and again, the Byzantine Empire ended in 1443. So that's when that era stopped. But he was such an important saint in this Greek epicenter, and the myth was able to dig its roots all over the world between AD 300 and 1440, before like his home, became unrecognizable to him. And the sources go on and on and on. So we do have easy definitive proof that he was a real person, and it's just wild again how the myth of the man became crazy. I mean, you listed everybody that he's a saint of, a patron saint of, including like sailors and things like that. And so those stories, I mean, we don't know if those stories are necessarily true. We don't know if he did pay for the dowry and stuff like that. But it's very clear that he was an important figure. Even Britannica is where I got a really good write-up on him, and he was even imprisoned during the persecutions of Christians by the Roman Emperor Diocletian. But then Constantine the Great was really important figure of the Eastern Empire, got him out, and he apparently attended the Council of Nicaea in 325, which was an extremely important Christian gathering. It had to do, I might be kind of putting it too much in a nutshell, but it had to do with like these two sects of Christianity at the time that were kind of debating on, there was like the Latin words for like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, who has permanence. The Latin was weird, and they were like, how venerated should Jesus be? It was a lot. It was a huge enough deal to have a huge, expensive council, and his name, Saint Nicholas's name, is in the ledger of attendees. Now, some people debate that he actually wasn't there and that he was written in because he was just still so important and a big deal in this Greek culture. But it's just really cool to see that Saint Nicholas has these definitive roots, even this happening nearly 800 years ago, if not more. if math works in my brain.
Almost 2000. Yeah.
There you go. Thank you. So yeah, I love the true roots that he has, and how it's just, what other saint it has this experience where he's still pretty recognizable to what he would have been, especially if you know him as Saint Nicholas. He's wearing the archbishop robes and things like that. Like, he's definitely changed for us more than what his like Eastern Greek appearance would have been. But it's just really cool to see. And then, of course, yeah, like going back to Krampus and his friends, it just, all of a sudden these things got attached to it, and he has these companions. And so it's just so funny to see this real Christian saint from the height of an empire turns into this phenomenon of, again, I call him the Coca-Cola Santa of today.
Right. He's become quite commercial, but at the core of it is giving and love, and I think that's something that Saint Nicholas would be proud of, even though he was a very humble man.
Right. Yeah. Those stories of him like giving to the man's or the women's father for the dowries, those precede our gift giving kind of versions of him. That came first, and then everything came later. And
it is interesting because he became a saint shortly after his death. Like, it's typically there's a bit of a waiting period, but he was made a saint very quickly. Now, Bryant, we have a few more minutes.
Yeah, I know.
I was hoping to read some of our listeners' Christmas stories, but we don't seem to have any. But I do have a visit from Saint Nicholas queued up here, and I think we might have enough time to get through it if you think that's a good idea.
Yeah. The night before Christmas. You want to do it?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Here, hold on. You go ahead and start, but I'll pull it up too. I've got it ready.
Okay. So this is the famous poem, A Visit from Saint Nicholas, written by Clement Clark Moore. 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that Saint Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And Mama in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprung from my bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave a luster of midday to objects below. When what to my wondering eyes did appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer. With a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment he must be Saint Nick. More rapid than eagles, his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen. Oh, come on, Cupid, on Donner and Blitzen. To the top of the porch, to the top of the wall. Now dash away, dash away, dash away all. As leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they met with an obstacle, mount to the sky. So up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with the sleigh full of toys and Saint Nicholas too. And then, in a twinkling, I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney Saint Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard on his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke had encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. but I heard him exclaim ere he drove out of sight, Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Have a good holiday, a Merry Christmas, and yeah, check out mythstorie.com and the rest of the Pod VCom. Thank you for being here. And I put in the comments as well, that was from Project Gutenberg. The ebook is used for anyone. Go to www.gutenberg.net. You can read it yourself. They have tons of other Christmas stories. It's a really cool source. So everyone, we'll see you next time. Thank you, Peter.
Merry Christmas.